Modulations in music color the discourse with fresh atmospheric information, which in a way is a subtext or a highlighter of the melodic line, of the chosen tonality, which remains by itself a mystery. Why does a composer for piano, a chromatic instrument with 88 pre-tuned keys, have to choose a tonality more than another to express a piece of music that is without lyrics, just a solo piano piece, for instance? And very often we can wonder if that is the case because there is, in the time period of the composition, tonalities which are symbolizing death or sorrow, joy, or because of famous pieces composed around them or just before them. For instance, in Mozart, you can say the D minor is the dramatic opera for tonality of Don Giovanni, as well as of the concerto for piano, K466, as well as the Requiem. So you can say that C minor is the somber tonality of the faith, and at the end of the fate which humans reach. And this is what Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is about. This is what a lot of music written in C minor, like the sonata, the Pathétique by Beethoven too, symbolizes, as well as Mozart Concerto K491. So you could say that a composer choosing a minor and major mode is a choice that is to do with the mood, but the very fine tuning of choosing a tonality over another by the fact of choosing it because of what it represents for them. Now we assume in distance back in time that they were thinking about the connections that I gave you with some pieces that are iconic of music, and therefore the tonalities which are associated to them. But I still think that there is an intuition. I can only speak of my meager experience, which is only me, and I'm not pretending to speak on behalf of composers. I just speak of me. When I hear music speaking within myself, in my retrieving it from some layers from deep inside my psyche, or at least that's how I more or less can refer to this process. The tonality in which the music comes is not something I choose. It happens on its own. Now, I could choose to transpose it or decide to organize it differently because different movements can be fitting differently other sections. That's true. And you can make that, but modulations is different. Modulations is not transposing as is in another key. It's not choosing the relative minor, which is part of the key, or the relative major, which is part of the key if you're in major or minor. These are the relatives. These are the expected common tones. And this communality of tones allows you to be in another key without to produce a modulatory transition. But the effect of a, let's say, inharmonic transition, Schubert was very keen of them, makes you feel like you're so far from the original key, yet so close, because within a pivotal chord, often a diminished seventh, but not always, could be a German sixth with the augmented sixth, therefore, makes you go from a tonality that appears so far away, not like the relative major or minor of each key. And then through this this inharmonic, meaning the sharp becoming flat, and so all of a sudden you feel like you can pivot back to the original key. And modulation, it's about going home or going away far from home, if home is the original tonality. And that is a beautiful analogy, I find, because most of the time you visit close relatives, that is the secondary tonics, therefore with secondary dominance. And if you stay briefly in the tonality of your subdominant or the second degree, you don't modulate, to say you don't travel into establish yourself in another key. And when do we decide analytically that this is the case? Because we don't know how the composers thought, they just wrote. So we look at this analytically at the structure, and we look at the distance and the time in which they establish themselves in this new tonality. Is it a borrowed tonality? Is it just visiting relatives? Or is it really going abroad? And generally, yes, we adapt the tonalities modulation to the length in which we're going to be in this other key. Sometimes the composers, when they return to the original key, pass by another key just as a delay delight of the welcome in return home, which is sort of soothing and making you feel as a listener that you traveled with the thought process of the composer, who uses this or that theme, this or that melody, this or that pattern, and then develops it into this and there, and travels in ways that you almost marveled. You go, oh, I didn't know this country, or what a great scenery, and then, oh, I'm home. And I think that modulation is really more than only analytically a situation that you can place on the degree of the scale and how you move to another scale. I think it's more about composers using it as a mood setting, surprising, searching to go beyond, and yes, way beyond where they are, and then how then they return is the art of the transition, the art of the modulation back. You can do a chromatically exponentially expanding chordal progression, which allows you to reach dominance every third on the degrees of each tonal system, and you can do the circle of fifths actually through different tonalities, 7 of them. But it's like sometimes called the omnibus modulation, or you go through the circle of fifths like Bach did very often, which is sort of like going through the dial of an analogic clock, and then you find yourself at a certain point where you put the leading tone of this tone chord, and then you are in that chord. And if you do a shortcut and you use an intermediary chord like a diminished 7 that can resolve itself in all 12 tonalities of the tonal system with different functions as a raised 4 or raised second degree, and well, raised 6th, because raised 2nd or 4th is if it's in major and minor. Because major and minor are not tonalities, they're modes in for each of the tonalities. And so, therefore, this kind of intertwined tritone chord that has only minor 7s is the quintessential tension chord that is used often in film music to symbolize suspense, expectation, spookiness, because it's unsettled. It needs a resolution, open, close, one way or the other. And therefore, Liszt, for instance, used prominently the diminished 7th chord as this wanderer chord. Once you hit it, you can go anywhere. You can be potentially anywhere on the tonal system, depending on how you resolve it. Most of the time is a dominant function on the leading tone. But that's for 4 tonalities. And then for the other two sets of four tonalities of all 12. You use it as a raised degree, therefore an alteration in the tonality in which you are resolving it in through its own dominant. And therefore you do the shortcut compared to passing through the dial of the circle of fifths. Then you have the opportunity to use this hint through a note that appears to be what it sounds. Of course, on the piano, we only have semitones as the smallest denomination, but quarter tones we don't have. And let's say a B flat and an A sharp, a D flat and a C sharp, an A flat and a G sharp, a G flat and an F sharp are the same keys on the piano, even because we only have semitones. We don't have subdivision to quarter tones. But on string instruments, on wind instruments, where the intonation is what you make it, not what is preset like on the piano, you could eventually do the quarter tone difference so that a B flat becoming an A sharp goes in B minor is like by this tiny little turn of the quarter of the screw, you enter in another world that is so foreign that you didn't expect, that the composers wants you as a listener to be amazed or surprised or worried about what does that mean in the development of the thematic material. Do we go in a dramatic mood or do we go in a more solace tonality? So there are really different ways to modulate, but I think the modulation essentially is really the atmospheric mood setting of the musical experience, of a storytelling, of a beautiful coating of the song. Because ultimately the piano imitates with the right hand most of the time, though not always, in the middle and sometimes in the low register, a melodic line which tells you things through the notes that are like poetic notes. You don't know exactly what they say because there is no specific lyrics to it like in a song. But because of the intervals, if it's step motion, it's soothing. If it's a leap, it's dramatic. If it's a dissonant leap, is scary. So you suggest through the gestures of the, like how you make the sound painting, so to say, of your melodic line, what your harmony codes and what the modulation atmospherically immerses you in a different shiver or a different, all analogies are there with test buds or atmospheric moods or change of seasons. And you feel like the storytelling is going through another subtle but evocative realm of expression in the other tonality in which or through which you go through. And when you hear pop songs, very often at the end of the song, after the stanzas, you have the ritornello, and then ultimately to lift up the spirit, the singer sings half a tone higher the final ritornello, which gives the audience who sings with the pop star, because they assumingly are fans, therefore they know the lyrics, so they want to participate in this immersion, this communion of being. And that signal of the semi-step higher is that the song is going to the end through an uplifting, literally by the semi-step mood setting that gives you the impression that you're going towards some kind of a climatic ending. And I find that this is suggested just by that, and not that it's an awareness by the listeners of them, but it's something that talks to the psyche directly, as music always does, beyond and besides the lyrics and the words themselves. Well, thank you so much.